So I wanted to take some time today to talk about another semi-auto conversion I've done in the past. Um, we'll see how many of you know which one this is going to be. Well, obviously you do because of the title. It's for a Sten MK3, but this one is a little bit different. So the original Sten MK3, all the Stens except the Mark V, and some people say the Owen. That is not the same thing. But all the Stens feed from a horizontal left-hand position or a passenger side position, and then they eject out of the right side, the driver's side. The semi-auto conversion that I did feeds from the bottom and ejects out the right-hand side. So it more or less resembles an MP3008, which was the German's last-ditch copy of the Sten in order to make a really cheap submachine gun to replace the MP40 in service. We all know how that went. But this is what it ends up looking like. This is the first open bolt, full auto to semi-auto closed bolt conversion I ever did. I think I did this when I was 18, and it shows. But this does work. It does run pretty well. So this is also the only semi-automatic conversion I've ever done using a ready-made conversion kit. So take the mag out here. As you can see, there's the mag well. There's the ejection port right there. This is a vertical feed Sten. So to show some comparison, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to disassemble the internals, take the stock off and all that sort of thing, and I've got some original Sten parts here to compare with, so bear with me and let me get that started for you. Okay, so here it is broken down into its respective pieces. So this is the trigger control group, the fire control group, with the tube, the barrel, and then both of the barrel bushings in here, the mag well, and the mag well also doubles as the ejector. Very hard to see, but it's right there. It's a integral part of the magazine well. So all of these parts were purchased through Indianapolis Ordnance, and this is their conversion kit. This uses a reduced inner diameter tube in order to negate the need for a denial bar in this system. That way a original full auto bolt can never fit in this receiver tube right here. So there's the receiver and the barrel. This is also the carbine length barrel. That way you can put a shoulder stock on it, and it's considered a minimum legal length rifle in the United States. So there's that. This is also optional right here. I actually selected to get the vent holes put in it because I thought it was super cool. I mean, I still think it's pretty cool, and we'll talk more about that later. But moving on from there, this is their solution to a closed bolt system. This is what's considered a linear hammer or a linear striker setup. So for comparison's sake, here is an original Sten bolt, spring, and charging handle. So you can see it's completely solid the whole way through, except for obviously this horizontal milling cut to put the profile in there. But this is completely solid. There's the back half right there that also acts as the spring guide. So another notable feature right here is that the charging handle goes all the way through, right? So moving on to the Indianapolis Ordnance conversion here, you can see that this is made up of a few different moving parts. So here are the guide rods and springs, and then here is the hammer, the linear hammer, the linear striker right here. This is the washer that keeps this whole contraption together, and the ends of these two guide rods have been peened over so they can't walk their way loose out of this setup while it's in the receiver. So moving on here, you can see this is the striker. This is made out of hardened steel. Not exactly sure what grade. You can see there's the surface where it strikes the firing pin. And then there's the hole for the guide rod and the springs to run on. And then this is what catches on the sear. Moving on from there, this is their semi-automatic vertical feed bolt. Here's the hole for the charging handle, which I must have, there it is. So this is their charging handle, which looks very similar to the original charging handle, but you can see it's much shorter. It basically looks like it's been cut right there, because in order for this system to work, you can't have the charging handle traverse all the way through, because you need a slot for the striker to run into. If you look down in there, there is the guide hole right there for the hammer guide rod, and then up here is the hole for the actual bolt guide rod and recoil spring. And then right there in the middle is an AR-15 firing pin. Here is the retention pin to hold in the firing pin. There's a spring in there as well. And then here is the bolt face with the hole for the actual bolt guide rod and the extractor. Notice how on the bolt face there is nothing there because this is a semi-automatic, whereas if we look at the original, is a fixed firing pin. Now you can also notice the difference in the way that these two are made in order to account for the vertical feed conversion. So notice the position of the extractors. So on the original Sten, the extractor, if we're looking at it with this horizontal cut on the bottom, the extractor is at the 12 o'clock. When we look at the vertical feed, we see that the bolt profile right here is at the bottom. It's at the 6 o'clock, and this is more or less at we'll say like a 2:30 position right here. Now, in correlation to how they actually sit in the receiver, put in the bolt handles so it gives you an idea where they sit. So right here is the bolt handle back there, and this is the way that this bolt rides in the original receiver. So mag feeds in from the left and then ejects out to the right because the ejector is on the magazine well. So feeds from the left, ejects out to the right. Now looking at the Indianapolis Ordnance vertical feed conversion. So there's the extractor, bolt cut out. So here is the bolt handle there. Magazine feeds from the bottom, extracts up there at the 230-ish position, and then the ejector on the mag well flips it up and out to the right hand side. So if you ask me, I think that's a really ingenious way on how to flip it around and make it work correctly. This is not really a straightforward conversion. This actually takes a lot of screwing around to kind of get it right. You can read a lot of this on the old forum posts and things like that where people have attempted doing this from scratch. And most of them actually, they succeeded, but it does take a little bit of trial and error. This conversion is actually really smart too because it's able to use the original fire control group out of the Sten without altering it a huge amount. And by reducing the ID of this tube, you'll never ever get an original bolt to fit, right? So that means that as long as this is all welded up, welded together, you can use the original existing sear down in there and use that as the sear for your new linear hammer / striker setup. And one of the modifications that you can actually make on here, obviously you have the automatic repeater button right here. You can actually use that as a safety. They have instructions to use that as a safety. And the way that the tube is cut out, there's also no provision to let the disconnector move to the full auto position. So it always goes back to the semi-automatic position. Again, with that modification, you can turn this into a safety. I never ended up doing that, but well, one of the I wouldn't say it's a drawback, but one of the things that you actually have to look out for when you're doing one of these conversions is that I would highly recommend you follow their instructions to the T. There's something to be said about knowing correct spring pressures and things like that and how to make everything work reliably, because if you see, these are two separate springs. They're obviously two separate lengths and they're two separate tensile pounds per spring. And one of the big things with doing semi-automatic conversions is that you've got to be able to tune your spring setup in order to account for the other extra stuff you've got going on there versus the original spring, which is just like, okay, the bolt needs to go back and forth. There we go, done. Right? So in a previous video, I mentioned that I actually had a couple of guns blow up on me. Well, this was one of them. Because me being 18 years old, I didn't really feel like following the directions the correct way, so this is completely my fault. But I had an out of battery discharge, and it was a pretty nasty one too. So what I had failed to realize when I put this kit together was that the recoil spring on top was actually swapped with the striker spring on the bottom when I went to go shoot it. I wasn't paying attention, and that was just pure stupidity on my part. So what ended up happening was the striker had all of the actual recoils, the bolt spring tension on it, and the bolt, which is a much heavier object, had the striker spring holding onto it, which wasn't enough to keep the bolt closed against the breech face. So what ended up happening was when the bolt rode home on this cartridge, there was enough bounce back after it impacted the breech face in order to hold the cartridge out of battery. And so when I pulled the trigger, this exploded out of battery, and all of this missing material that you see came straight out the ejection port, and a couple of pieces of it went right at me. So this was a major learning experience. I actually ended up getting a piece of brass stuck in my forehead. I never ended up going to the hospital for it, but it was stuck in there for about 2 years until it worked its way to the surface and I was able to pull it out. But yeah, always follow the directions. Again, don't take your time. I think that's the most important thing, is take your time with things like this. This is one of those, again, you're having small explosions right up next to your face, and when things go wrong, it'll ruin your day really, really fast, and depending on how bad they go, they could ruin your life really, really fast. So, again, a caveat with doing semi-automatic conversions of open bolt guns. Now, that's not to say that you should be scared of them and things like that. Just understand and respect the amount of power that they hold while you're holding them. So, that's the overview of the vertical feed. Let me put this back together, and then I'll go over some of its quirks. So one of the quirks, right, basically right off the rip with this style of kit, was the original Mark III was a ribbed piece of tubing, pretty much, and so that top rib ended up acting as your front sight with a little bit more of a jut up at the end that would be the very tip of your front sight. This tube in particular didn't come with that, and then the demilled kit that I got ended up basically just coming with a little, I'm talking like maybe 1/4 inch piece of that upper rib. And so set it to the side, went to go weld it on, couldn't find it anymore, and so it's been going on 12 years actually that I haven't bothered to put an actual front sight on this thing. I don't use this to go out and do like competition shooting. This is something we can take out to the field and have some fun with. One of the other quirks too, this thing gets hot. Like, it gets surprisingly hot. You would assume because it's vented and things like that. No, it gets hot. Luckily, with the vertical feed conversion, this is a lot more comfortable to hold like this versus an original side feeding, Mark II, Mark III. I've shot a couple of those on full auto, and it's kind of awkward to hold them like that, but that's just me. One of the other things too was going to demill this kit, this new size barrel, right? It needs this front bushing opened up, and it's not a perfect fit once you do open it up. So I would suggest, if you ever do end up going that route, to precisely measure this and then cut this with like a boring bar or something to that effect. And on that same note, the Mark III was a simplification of the Mark II. The Mark II had a barrel nut, and the magazine well could be swung up to the side for storage and moving around and things like that. The Mark III, these bushings, these trunnions, are riveted in place. So say if you ever need to swap the barrel or something like that, this kind of complicates that process. Obviously, another thing too, if you think about it, and you want to go to the SBR route, and you want to swap out to, like, say, an original length barrel or something like that, that's something else to consider, that you're going to have to demill these rivets. These are just beat-in rivets. They're not heat and beat rivets. They're not like AK rivets or whatever. So that's just another thing to consider. Other than that, though, it's a fun little conversion, fun little plinker toy, and things like that. And like I said, I mean, it's been going on 12 years, and ever since I figured out the issue with the whole bolt conversion thing the first time I went out shooting it, it's been fun. Sten parts are getting a little bit more expensive than they used to be. They're not, $80, $90 a kit plus a couple of mags and the correct stock anymore. So if you are thinking about doing one of these, I would suggest doing one now. And overall, I would say that the Indianapolis Ordnance setup is perfect. It's great for people that don't have a whole lot of experience building. It's got very clear written instructions that are very concise. So yeah, I would say go with it. I hope you enjoyed, and happy building.